Welcome back. My guests today are former federal Liberal Minister Dan McTeague, President of Canadians for Affordable Energy, and energy expert and journalist Parker Gallant. Dan, over to you. With regards to fossil fuels, which jurisdictions are the benchmark for you?
Well, jurisdictions, I think, are recognizing fossil fuels aren't going away anytime soon. The Americans came late in this idea of killing their own energy sector. They didn't do like Canada did, and as a result, they allowed themselves to build pipelines, infrastructure, LNG projects, and as a result, they're coming to the world's rescue, even though they are, the fifth largest provable reserves in the world. Other nations around the world aren't having trouble with this. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, all of these countries are saying we can produce more energy and we can get that energy to market, and we will do very well for the next 20, 30, 40 years. Countries that you mentioned earlier and others, China, they're going to use coal to continue to power their economy, even though they're building a lot of EVs. I think Canada has to take stock and inventory of what works. And what works is that the world wants more Canadian energy. And the only thing we need is a change in the direction in Ottawa and a change in the idea that somehow we should villainize the very things that the world needs more of. We can get and help the third world. We can help many parts of the world. We can stop the geopolitical messes I mentioned earlier in Russia if we only stood up and got our products to market. A good prime minister would put in place a national energy strategy that would ensure we have pipelines going east and going west, especially LNG. And if anybody stands in the way of that, then they ought to be offered a very long term in prison.
Gentlemen, this is the part of the show that every week I ask my guest, if you're a politician, what 3 things they would do to grow jobs in the economy. Parker, I got about a minute for each of you. What would you do?
This will be repeated by Dan, but the first thing I would do is get rid of that damn carbon tax. It's got to go. And along with the just transition that we're hearing about these days, and it's going to convert everything. My second move would be to look at regulations, because every time people apply for approvals now from the government, they have to go to 3 levels. There's the federal, provincial, and the municipal levels. So we've got regulations that just are stifling our industrial base, if you will. I was reading about the lithium mine that is going to be opened up, and they have got approval all the way from the feds, but 271 conditions apply to it. So I'm not sure when that mine's ever going to be open. I mean, first they got to spend a couple of $1 billion getting a highway up there. But those sorts of things are just crippling the economy. The third thing is something Dan just mentioned as well, is I would like the CRA to investigate charities, because those charities are getting billions of dollars from the federal government, provincial government, municipal governments to put the message out that we've got to get rid of fossil fuels. That's got to stop.
Okay, over to you, Dan. I got about a minute left. What 3 things would you do?
First of all, I would completely destroy and eviscerate any idea and fantasies around net zero. And that's where all the other stuff comes from. The Build Back Better, the Great Reset, the just transition, which, as we know, won't be just and is frankly ridiculous. I would say within that, get rid of the carbon tax. But more importantly, get rid of the clean fuel standard, the second carbon tax, and start recognizing that making this economy tick is important. And if you want to achieve any of those goals, you do so by the carrot, not the stick. Stop beating up consumers and making the country poor and unaffordable. The Canadian dream is disappearing because a handful of fanatics, paid for by your taxes and given oversight because we don't bother looking after charities, we don't probe them, is giving the country not just a black eye, but becomes less of an enviable place to live. Canadians deserve to have a future that they can all share and prosper in, and we can do that in a very clean way by doing what Canadians have always been best at: diversity of energy. We've done it for years, long before it was trendy, long before it was about climate bedwetting. So it's time for Canada to get real, and for politicians to stand in the way. Please step aside.
Well, thanks, gentlemen, for taking the time to join us today and share your thoughts on Canadian energy. Very important conversations. We could have prosperity, jobs, and a cleaner planet. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to my guest, former Liberal federal cabinet minister Dan McTeague, and energy expert and journalist Parker Gallant. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators. If you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at ideas@thenewsforum.ca, and we'll see you next time right here on the Newsforum Network.